Maurice, yes, it is an honor to be invited one more time to be on your program. I'm honored, and I hope that our exchange of views tonight will be of benefit to our viewing audience. I would like to begin by pointing out that this is not the first Arab Spring. No, that there was another Arab Spring about 100 years ago. And there's a remarkable similarity between the two Arab Springs. Both of them were engineered by the same Anglo-American Western Alliance. Both of them had the same objective of advancing the Zionist agenda to further the cause of a Euro state of Israel, which would eventually become a ruling state. In that first Arab Spring, remember that the Ottoman Islamic Empire, which had served Western Europe very faithfully, while plunging a bloody knife for almost 600 years into Eastern Europe, what the Quran refers to as Rome, that Ottoman Islamic Empire, which had served the cause of Western Europe so faithfully for almost 500-600 years, was dismantled. And in its place came pro-Western Arab rulers. For example, in Arabia, the Saudi regime came to power with a very faithful agenda of aligning themselves with the Anglo-American Alliance, the Zionist Alliance. Similarly, in other parts of the Arab world that were parts of the Ottoman Empire, pro-Western rulers were all put in place. And in consequence of that first Arab Spring, Israel could be created. Had there not been that first Arab Spring, Israel could not have been created. Now, Herman, the second Arab Spring is taking place. And its purpose is to take the Israeli state one step further to its culmination, really, where the Libyan regime was unwilling to become a client and an ally of the Anglo-American Zionist Alliance. And that is the basic reason why it had to be removed. And so, Maurice, history is simply repeating itself 100 years later. That Arab Spring and this Arab Spring show remarkable similarity. And now we come to Iran, and we see an Iranian regime which has its roots in its indigenous culture, indigenous religious values, and is unwilling to bend its knee to Anglo-American Israeli alliance. On the contrary, it has successfully forged what may be called an alliance with Russia. And therefore it has to be punished and it has to be removed. So we don't need any sophisticated political analysis to understand what's happening today. In the case of Bahrain, Saudi Arabia was not willing to allow the Arab Spring to reach Arabia. So Saudi Arabia moved swiftly to cut off all possible demonstrations that could endanger the regime. And Saudi Arabia was not willing to allow the Arab Spring to reach to Bahrain. And so Saudi Arabia intervened And my understanding is that they also paid for Pakistani mercenaries, as usual, mercenaries, they paid for it, to go into Bahrain and to prop up the monarchy in Bahrain, which happens to be Sunni. But it's not so much Sunni-Shia conflict in Bahrain. No, because the regime is there because of lust for power. Whether it was Sunni or whether it was any other religious affiliation, it is its lust for power. So we cannot blame the Sunni creed for the behavior of the regime in Bahrain. And they have used their power to oppress the Shia majority. Barbarous oppression in Bahrain. And the purpose for that oppression is that Saudi Arabia will feel endangered and threatened if the Arab Spring were to successfully bring about regime change in Bahrain. But the same people who have pursued this barbarous agenda in Bahrain, ruthless oppression of the Shia majority in Bahrain, and also Sunnis in Bahrain who are opposed to the regime, it is these same forces who are calling for democracy and freedom and rights in Syria. But it is clear that those who are now, the rump which is now left, that is fighting in Syria against the regime, have to be described, and there is no better word to describe them, than terrorists. They're not freedom fighters. They don't represent Islam, the religion. They're paid terrorists. And I want to say this on your program for the first time, that I label them as terrorists.
Very potent that you are saying this.
So that's my take on Bahrain and Syria.
I'm quite shocked. I also feel that you mentioned Iran in a respectful manner, recognizing that it's perhaps becoming the best voice there is for the Islamic world, or pragmatism, real world politics. Iran is now the only strong voice left. Would that be correct, to protect Muslims, Arabs, Islam?
The regime in Iran demonstrates greater integrity, religious integrity, than most of the other regimes in the world of Islam. For example, Prophet Muhammad, Allah's blessings be upon him, prophesied. This is his prophecy, that Muslims are going to form an alliance with Rome. It is pronounced as R-O-O-M, Rome, but the Arabic word Rome is, it describes Eastern Christianity. When they broke away from Constantinople and they formed the church in Rome, the Roman Catholic Church, then you had two Christianities, one of the East, the Byzantine, and one of the West, which is now Rome. So the one in the East was called Rome, and in the Quran Allah refers to it as Rome. And when Muslims conquered Constantinople in a conquest which was largely shameful and embarrassing for Islam, when they conquered Constantinople, then Rome was transferred to Moscow. And so today Rome is Moscow and the allies of Moscow. So the Prophet prophesied that we Muslims will make an alliance with Rome. Today, who is making an alliance with Rome? Who is showing religious integrity? It's not Saudi Arabia, which is allied with the Anglo-American Zionist alliance. Rather, it is Iran.
Yeah.
And now Pakistan finally, since the sword is at its throat now, because India is lusting to attack from the east, and NATO is preparing to attack from Afghanistan to destroy Pakistan's nuclear plants and nuclear weapons, and to break up Pakistan into bits and pieces. That's their plan. Now that the Pakistani regime has realized that the moment of truth has now arrived after all these years of foolishness, now they're trying to build closer ties with Russia. Personally, I think it's too late now for them to do that. When Israel launches her attacks that we all know are going to be launched shortly, within the next few months, I believe, the impact on Turkey is going to be very interesting. There is considerable resentment amongst Turkish Muslims of the behavior of the Turkish government and the Turkish military in what happened in Libya and what is now happening in Syria. And so I am anticipating that once Israel comes out from behind the curtain and launches her wars, that is going to provoke eventually civil war in Turkey. And that civil war in Turkey, I may have mentioned this to you in my last interview, that civil war in Turkey will lead to the strengthening of the alliance with Rome, with Russia. And your viewing audience, Morris, would be fascinated to learn that Prophet Muhammad also prophesied that Constantinople would be conquered. And he praised the army that will conquer Constantinople. And he praised the military leader of that army. Now, Constantinople was conquered in the 15th century by the Ottoman Turks. And most of the world of Islam came to the conclusion that that was a fulfillment of that prophecy. But it was not. It was not. I'll tell you why. Number one, the Ottoman armed force that conquered Constantinople was comprised of three different units. One were the volunteers who actually joined the army for looting. And the second were the well-trained armed forces of all different parts of the Ottoman Empire. But then there was a third unit, and that was the elite unit, the best trained of all. And they were called the Janissaries. Do you know who they were comprised of?
No.
It is one of the most shameful chapters of Muslim history. That what the Ottomans did was that all the territories of Eastern Europe that they defeated, they would seize Christian children from their parents and then convert these Christian children to Islam by force. And then train these boys, give them the best possible training and education, and they became the personal army of the Ottoman Sultan. And these are the ones who fought to conquer Constantinople. That army could not be an army that could be praised by Prophet Muhammad. The second point I want to mention is, when that Ottoman army conquered Constantinople, guess what they did? The first thing they did. The Sultan took the pride of the Christian world, Hagia Sophia, the cathedral that was built by Justinian, and which for 1,000 years had remained the premier cathedral of the Christian world, Hagia Sophia, otherwise known as Hagia Sophia. And he converted it to a masjid, or a mosque. It was an act, a shameful, sinful act, unprecedented in our history. And so he could not be the leader to be praised by the Prophet. I could go on more than this.
Well, the point is clear. Please.
The conquest of Constantinople is still to take place. The conquest of Constantinople that was prophesied by Prophet Muhammad, Allah's blessings be upon him, Morris, is still to take place. It has not taken place. And I'm saying to you tonight that that conquest which is coming is meant to take the city of Istanbul out of NATO. to no longer be a NATO city. And Turkey will no longer be a part of NATO. And that struggle to take Turkey and Istanbul out of NATO cannot succeed without an alliance with the Eastern Christians. And so Iran is on the right path in forging her alliance with Russia.
Yes, we are all looking to Russia more and more and more to stop the imperialist onslaught, which revolves around a lot of pain and killing of innocent people, defenseless people. I've kind of questioned what the imperialists are really. We know that they like resources and to manage the economies, but is assimilation a goal of Western imperialism, of NATO? To import people, to create refugees and create multicultural societies throughout the Western world, Europe and America? Is this a policy of NATO's conquest? Because the countries that are targeted, North Korea, Libya, Syria, Iran, they are all indigenous people. They are not multicultural societies. They are not societies where it is easy to get citizenship. And these are the societies that are our enemies. So I'm asking you if you can see a social engineering need for assimilation enforced.
There is a racial agenda in modern Western civilization. Western Europe was not racist until Western Europe was infected with a certain virus that transformed it into Western civilization. It used to be a Christian world, Christendom. And then Christendom was dismantled. And in its place came this mysterious new actor on the stage of history, namely modern Western civilization. And modern Western civilization came on the stage of history with a very virulent racist agenda. It was called jingoism. It was the white man's burden to civilize the rest of the world. And they made no bones about it. But all the rest of mankind have to become copycats of the modern West. You must eat the way we eat. It is uncivilized, Morris, to eat with your hands and with your fingers. All people ate with their fingers. This is divinely constructed cutlery. But no, eating with your fingers is uncivilized. And you must now eat the way we eat, otherwise you will not be considered to be a civilized human being. You must dress the way we dress. You must no longer maintain your own native way of dress. And if you continue to dress that way, and you do not put on the jacket and tie, collar, then you are uncivilized. You have not reached the stage of civilization. And finally, you must worship the God that we worship. And the God that they worship, for all intents and purposes, Morris, was a white man. Yes. So all of mankind must follow not the Eastern Christian, but the Western Christian, the one from the Vatican. And so this racist agenda was imposed upon mankind. We saw it flourishing in North America, where the indigenous Indians were considered to be less than cockroaches. They were not human beings. We saw it flourishing in Africa. The slave trade before the West came was something bad, yes, but that slave trade was not as horrible as the slave trade as it came from the Western world. And the primitive peoples of the world, around the world, people who live the primitive way of life, all over the world, in Australia, in New Zealand, in Canada. Now you see those who yesterday were people who lived so beautifully in harmony with nature, who had such good health that they could go into a river and catch a fish with their own hands. And now you see these people in blue jeans eating McDonald's hamburgers and drinking whiskey. This racist agenda has been a part of the modern West from day one, but it was not a part of Christendom. And so I think the time has come for the historian to ask, from whence has come this virus which attacked Western Europe, but not Eastern Europe? Western Europe, but not Eastern Europe. And so what I see is history repeating itself. That at this stage they're simply moving to the culmination of an agenda that they've been pursuing all these years, for the last few hundred years. This is my historian's take on the subject.
Well, it seems reasonable, it seems logical that we are seeing something that is a continuation of the conquest of America, of Australia, of the importing and transporting of slaves. We are still in the same modus operandus. It's not a shock. This is nothing new, what is going on today, the bombing and conquest of impoverished nations. Sheikh Imran Hossein, I've been told that you have been referred to as a Sufi, and I would like it if you could explain what this word means.
It's nothing new. The Jew, the Christian, the Muslim, the Hindu, the Buddhist are all familiar with that part of the religious way of life which may be described, for want of a better word, as the spiritual life. The spiritual life is one which commences with moral purification. All of us will commit sin. None is without sin. But we make a distinction between big sins and little sins. Little sins none of us can avoid. And the Quran speaks about it. Lamam, minor sins. But if you have major sins, major defects in your conduct, then that's it, you cannot pursue the spiritual path. Amongst the major sins would be to worship other than the one God, to oppress others by lending money on interest, for example, or by transaction based on deception through which you rip off people, like your modern paper money, or by committing acts of adultery, fornication. Because in adultery and in fornication, you are destroying the family. You're destroying the life of a child. You're destroying a home. That's why adultery and fornication is a major sin. It's not just a few moments of lust. It's more than that. It's the destruction of the family. So these major sins stand in the way. And when you live a life of moral rectitude, and you're away from the major sins, even if you still have some minor sins, it does not matter. You're on the path. You can now pursue spiritual growth. And spiritual growth is realized when when light enters the heart. Light. Every religion knows about this. Judaism has created great spiritual luminaries. Christianity has created great spiritual luminaries. Hinduism has done the same thing. Buddhism has done the same thing. It's nothing new. But there are stages to spiritual growth. When you get a little bit of light in the heart, then the internal eye can see. Those who today control power in the world are people with masters and PhDs in deception. One of the acts of deception is, of course, called false flag terrorism. And if you do not have internal sight, you will be taken for a ride. And you will make your judgment based on appearance. But when you have internal sight, you will go beyond the external form to the internal reality. And then you know actually what happened. I was in New York on the morning of 9/11. I went to Kennedy Airport at 7 o'clock that morning to pick up someone arriving from Pakistan. And then I had to drive from Kennedy to LaGuardia Airport. And when we arrived at LaGuardia, we were told that all flights were cancelled. We didn't know why. And then subsequently the announcement was made, the airport is closed, get out of the airport. We didn't know why. When I got back home, then I learned, watching television, about the Twin Towers. And as soon as I saw what happened on television, I was immediately able to grasp intuitively, immediately, that this is the work of the Israeli Mossad and the CIA. And this is history repeating itself. That this is what happened 100 years earlier, in 1914. In the summer of 1914, the assassination in the city of Sarajevo of the Archduke Franz Ferdinand. That false flag terrorism led to the First World War. And through the First World War, the Zionist agenda was fulfilled. And I was able to recognize this as false flag terrorism. And that this is going to lead now to great wars. And these great wars are going to be waged so that Israel can benefit from them. This is called spiritual insight. Because I don't have the evidence before me. No, it is insight. So Sufism, in its essence, is the spiritual path through which the heart, which has been purified of major moral defects, and which has now reached a stage of moral rectitude, that heart can now receive light from the Lord, from Allah. And as light enters into that heart, you now have the capacity for internal sight. The scriptures all speak the same words, that there are those who have eyes and yet do not see. There are those who have ears and yet do not hear. There are those who have hearts and yet do not understand. They're just like cattle. This is epistemology. And so, when you pursue the path of Sufism or Tasawwuf, it should lead you and give you the capacity eventually to recognize the modern monetary system of bogus and fraudulent paper currency and the even more dangerous electronic money that is coming. You should be able to call a spade, recognize it as a spade. The tragedy of the age in which we now live, Maurice, is that even those who call themselves Sufis cannot recognize the reality of the world today. Something has gone wrong with the methodology of the spiritual quest, yeah.
It's the feeling of powerlessness. I'd like to comment on the comment you made of false flags. They were documented false flags in Egypt and Iraq of Jews, Israelis making the Jews go to Israel by putting off bombs and blaming the Arabs for doing this when it was Jews that were caught red-handed on occasion. But in a similar manner, we see 9/11, and I would imagine most people in America or in the world believe it was a false flag, you know? But everyone seems so powerless now. Nobody is able to really do anything. And the internet, I work with it, but in a way it's our enemy. It's stopping people really going out and protesting, you know?
No, it's not correct to say that we are powerless and we're doing nothing, we cannot do nothing. I think it was just hours ago, maybe yesterday, that the Chief of Staff of the Russian Armed Forces made a declaration that Russia might have to take preemptive action, following in the footsteps of Uncle Sam, following in the footsteps of Israel, following the footsteps of those who have given to the world the military strategy of preemptive strikes. It was a beautiful statement from the Russian Chief of Staff that we might have to take a preemptive strike if you continue making a ring around us, a missile ring which we perceive to be endangering our security. Israel is saying that the development of nuclear power in Iran threatens Israel's security. If that is a valid argument, then the Russian argument is also valid. If Israel could launch a preemptive strike against Iran, then Russia can launch a preemptive strike also against all of those missiles that are being placed around Russia. It was a beautiful statement on the part of the Russian Armed Forces chief, yes. And don't forget, a couple of days from now, Vladimir Putin takes over as president of Russia. And he's already given them a bloody nose in Georgia. So they know who they're dealing with. Putin is not going to bend his knees, and Russia is not going to bend its knees. No. And China is forging an alliance with Russia. And so we're not sitting down and doing nothing. We are watching before our eyes a scenario being unfolded in which those who are hell-bent with a pig-headed obstinacy of ruling the world, even if it must lead to nuclear warfare, even if billions of people must die, it doesn't matter. These people who are essentially mad want to rule the world. And Russia is saying, you're not going to do it to us. And so it's not demonstrations that are going to change the situation today. You just have to take a look and see what Russia is doing.
Well, the statement is bold. I'm not entirely familiar with what it's doing, but I guess it's rearming and modernizing its military, if that's what you mean by looking at what Russia is doing.
No, I'm saying that the situation is not one in which there is no response, that we are sitting down in a state of helplessness. I want the viewing audience to know that a situation is evolving in the world before our eyes. And we must understand it, that the two major powers in the world are now moving in a collision course. That collision course between these two major powers, the American-led alliance and the Russian-led alliance, is going to lead to nuclear warfare of such a magnitude that there's only one word that we can look for in the vocabulary to fit it, and that's called Armageddon. That is, millions and millions and millions are going to die. Most of them probably in North America and Europe. Europe of the East and Europe of the West. And what is left of the world after that, the Zionists hope that they can cope with it and they can somehow survive and come out top. And Israel will rule the world, the rump that is left after the two giants engage in a war of mutual destruction. That is what we're facing now, Morris.
It strikes a chord. You are on the zeitgeist always. Sheikh Imran Hussein, I've no more to ask you. It has been so much to take in and very easy to follow you. And it is enlightening, the entire experience, to hear what you say. I'm ever so thrilled, and I do believe you said a couple of things which are new for us all to hear from you.
I have something more to say.
Please.
I forgot to say it.
Please.
I want Eastern Europe to listen to me, and I want Russia to listen to me. That on that day, when Muslims conquer Istanbul, the conquest prophesied by Prophet Muhammad, Allah's blessings be upon him, the first thing that we will do is to return the church, the cathedral, Hagia Sophia, return it to the Christian world. And when we return it to the Christian world, we'll have to return it with an apology. An apology for 600 years of Muslim worship in that church when it should have been a church, not a masjid. And then when Mustafa Kemal took it over, he added insult to injury. He took the house of God and made it a museum. So the first thing we'll do is to return Hagia Sophia to the Christian world. And I pray that Allah may cause these words of mine to reach to Bulgaria, and reach to Greece, and reach to Romania, and reach to Hungary, and reach to Poland, and reach to Russia. The second thing that we'll do is to recover the old name of the city. It was Constantinople. Constantine is the one who built the city. The Emperor Constantine gave it the name Constantinople. There were other names that were used, like Istanbul. But the name that by which the city was known all around the world was Constantinople. And when our prophet spoke about it, our prophet used the name Constantinople. He said in Arabic, لَتَفْتَحَنَّ الْقُنْسْتَنْتِنِيَّةِ, that you will most certainly conquer Constantinople. And so when we take over that city once again in the name of Islam, the name of the city will return to Constantinople. At that time, we'll be in alliance with Russia. So it will no longer be a NATO city. And so Russia would have a passage through the Bosphorus for the Russian Navy to enter into the Mediterranean. And that spells trouble for Israel. That's all I want to say.
There is a treaty allowing Russia to send some ships to the Mediterranean, but there's a limit.
That's right.
That's right. Well, I hope some Israelis will look at what you have said as well, and maybe think about what's going on.
Oh, there are some Israelis. There are some Israelis who are waking up. They are, and they are realizing that this madcap government that they have is leading them to disaster, and they don't know how to stop it.